Welcome, the anointed ones. A lie can travel halfway around the world, while the truth is still tying its shoes. But when the truth finally stands up, it doesn't need to run. 8 years, not 8 days, not 8 months. 8 full years of watching, tracking, whispering, documenting, speculating, and waiting for something, anything, to finally stick. That alone should tell you this was never about justice. Because here's a quiet, uncomfortable fact most people don't like to admit. Real wrongdoing rarely needs a decade to be proven. When something actually happens, evidence doesn't play hide-and-seek for nearly 10 years like it's on vacation. It shows up fast, loud, and uninvited. What you're about to hear isn't a victory lap or a sob story. It's an autopsy, an examination of what happens when people commit years of energy, resources, and emotional obsession to hunting someone for something that never existed. At a certain point, the search stops being professional and starts becoming personal. Clipboards turn into grudges, procedures turn into rituals, and suddenly, the hunt itself becomes more important than the truth. There's also something unintentionally hilarious about it, if we're being honest. Imagine waking up every day for 8 years with the same mission. Today might be the day we finally catch them, only to end each year with empty hands, tired excuses, and increasingly awkward silence. That's not persistence. That's sunk cost panic. When you've invested that much time into being wrong, admitting the truth feels more expensive than continuing the lie. This story isn't about how someone survived being hunted. It's about how the hunt exposed the hunters, how the absence of evidence slowly turned into evidence of absence, how time, of all things, became the most ruthless witness in the room. Because while they were searching for dirt, the calendar was quietly testifying. Every passing year wrote the same sentence again and again. Nothing happened here. And by the end of it all, when the dust settled and the files went cold, the most shocking part wasn't that nothing was found. It was that 8 years of effort proved exactly one thing. Some people will chase a fiction longer than they'll face the truth, especially when the truth points back at them. Number 1, they didn't hunt you because of evidence, they hunted you because of discomfort. For 8 long years, every move you made, every moment of your life was scrutinized, not because you did something wrong, but because your existence made them uncomfortable. They weren't searching for proof. They were searching for relief from the uneasy truth that someone, somewhere, was living with clarity, integrity, or success they couldn't comprehend or control. It's easy to dismiss it as obsession or paranoia, but the reality cuts deeper. Humans rarely go to war over facts. They go to war over fear, envy, and the chaos that mirrors their own inner conflicts. You didn't commit a crime. You weren't hiding anything. You were simply a reflection of the life, the values, or the strength they couldn't face in themselves. Every time they tried to frame a narrative, it fell apart. Every accusation they whispered or documented didn't stick. And yet, they kept coming. Not because they had evidence, but because you reminded them of something their carefully constructed world refused to acknowledge. Maybe you were calm under pressure while they crumbled. Maybe you succeeded where they failed. Maybe you simply existed with a consistency they couldn't imitate. That consistency, that quiet refusal to conform to their expectations, is what turned you into a target. The longer they hunted, the clearer it became that the root of their obsession wasn't a crime, it was the discomfort of confronting someone who didn't fit into their story. You weren't guilty, you were inconvenient. Your presence forced them to reckon with their own weaknesses, their own shame, and the parts of themselves they tried to bury. And the truth is, it wasn't meant to be fair. No one said the world rewards innocence when others are threatened by it. Your life became a mirror, and they hated the reflection so much that they couldn't stop chasing it. By the time the 8 years passed, what was supposed to be an investigation had turned into a portrait of their own insecurities, painted in their desperation and obsession. You didn't just survive, you exposed them. Every day they spent hunting you wasn't proof of your guilt. It was proof of their fear, their weakness, and the uncomfortable reality that sometimes being clean and living right is enough to unnerve the entire world. Number 2. The accusation came after the conclusion, not before it. From the very start, the story wasn't about discovering what really happened. It was about proving what they had already decided. Long before a single piece of evidence was collected, long before logic or facts had a chance to breathe, they had already chosen you as guilty. Everything that followed was a desperate attempt to fit reality into the shape of their conclusion, like forcing a square peg into a round hole and then blaming the peg for not fitting. The irony is brutal. The hunt never had a chance to be fair because fairness requires starting with the truth, not the assumption. This is the quiet tragedy of being targeted for nothing. They acted as though evidence mattered, but in reality, the evidence was secondary. It was merely a tool, a prop, a justification for a narrative that existed entirely in their minds. Every report they wrote, every witness they called, every angle they examined wasn't about understanding you. It was about retrofitting facts to align with a story that needed to feel true. And when nothing fit, when the truth refused to bend to their wishes, they simply spent more time, more energy, and more resources trying to force it to comply. 8 years of spinning wheels, all because they had already made up their minds. What makes this so dangerous and so revealing is how it exposes their priorities. They weren't interested in truth, accountability, or justice. They were interested in vindication. You didn't exist as a person to be understood. You existed as a puzzle piece they had already decided must belong in the guilty section. Your innocence didn't matter, because their goal was never the truth. It was closure for their own egos, validation for their own fear, and a story they could tell themselves to feel right. And yet, the world has a way of revealing that kind of arrogance. 8 years of chasing a conclusion instead of a fact doesn't strengthen a case. It erodes credibility. Every day they tried to force reality to match their story only highlighted the emptiness of it. In the end, the accusation existed before the proof, and the absence of proof didn't stop them, it exposed them. It exposed a system, a mindset, and a truth about human obsession. Sometimes people don't hunt the guilty. They hunt anyone who reminds them of the lies they've told themselves. Number 3. 8 years reveals desperation, not authority. When someone spends 8 years hunting a person for a crime they didn't commit, it doesn't speak to their power. It speaks to their panic. Real authority, real control, doesn't need a decade-long chase. Real influence makes decisions and lets consequences fall into place. What chased you wasn't confidence. It wasn't strategy. It was fear dressed up as procedure, obsession masquerading as investigation. Every file, every meeting, every whispered conversation wasn't proof of diligence. It was proof of desperation. The quiet, ugly acknowledgement that nothing they were doing was working, and yet they couldn't stop. Desperation is loud in subtle ways. It shows in the repeated mistakes, the overcompensation, the need to document everything as if the paper itself could conjure the guilt they imagined. They created schedules, followed routines, and micromanaged timelines not to catch the truth, but to convince themselves they were in control. They weren't. Every passing year chipped away at their credibility. Every failure to find evidence became a testament, not to your guilt, but to their obsession and the inadequacy of their methods. They looked like authorities, but authority is quiet. Authority doesn't need justification. Authority doesn't need 8 years to feel legitimate. What they really displayed was human panic under pressure. The relentless, irrational, exhausting kind that makes people look important while accomplishing nothing. And the irony is sharp. The longer they chased, the more obvious it became to anyone paying attention that the real problem wasn't you. The problem was them, their inability to face uncertainty, their need to control a story that had already escaped their hands. They turned energy into noise, time into theatrics, and their obsession into a reflection of their own failure. By the end, the trail they left behind screamed louder than any accusation ever could. It wasn't authority that hunted you for 8 years. It was fear. It was inadequacy. It was desperation wearing a mask of competence. And while they spent nearly a decade spinning in circles, you didn't just survive. You stood as the quiet witness to their unraveling, the proof that real strength doesn't need a chase. It endures without question, without excuse, without fear. Number 4. You became the container for everything they couldn't admit about themselves. For 8 years, every accusation, every whisper, every surveillance attempt wasn't really about you. It was about them. They used you as a vessel to hold all the shame, envy, fear, and guilt they refused to confront in themselves. Your innocence was irrelevant. Your life was irrelevant. What mattered was that someone had to carry the weight of the darkness they couldn't face head-on, and you fit the role perfectly without even trying. It's a harsh truth, but one that explains why the hunt lasted so long. People will cling to the illusion of control by projecting their failures onto others rather than admitting their own weakness. When they looked at you, they didn't see a person. They saw a mirror, and mirrors are dangerous for those unwilling to confront the reflection. Every decision they made, every piece of evidence they tried to manufacture, wasn't meant to reveal your wrongdoing. It was meant to distract them from their own. They couldn't bear to admit that the chaos in their lives, the resentment they felt, the envy gnawing at their thoughts, wasn't caused by you but by themselves. So they made you the culprit in a story they were desperate to believe. They didn't even need you to actually do anything wrong. Just being a stable, competent, or principled human being was enough to make them project their insecurities onto you. Over time, the roles became grotesquely clear. You weren't just the target. You were the container, absorbing the mess they refused to own. Every false lead, every pointless interview, every attempt to catch you was a way for them to cope with the parts of themselves they were unwilling to look at. The longer it went on, the more obvious it became that their obsession wasn't about justice or truth. It was about avoiding the discomfort of self-reflection. By surviving their 8-year campaign, you revealed the truth they couldn't face, that their fear, hatred, and failure had nothing to do with you. They used you as a vessel, but vessels can't hold what doesn't belong to them. You carried nothing but yourself, and in the process you exposed the hollow core of their obsession, the fragility of their self-deception, and the raw truth that sometimes the hunted becomes the measure of the hunter's own failure. Number 5, they were searching for permission to destroy you, not for the truth. From the very first moment, the hunt wasn't about uncovering facts. It was about justifying cruelty. Every meeting, every report, every surveillance effort was designed to answer a single question they couldn't openly ask. Is it okay to break them? They didn't need evidence to confirm your guilt. They needed moral permission, a way to tell themselves that whatever destruction they unleashed was deserved. The tragedy of this is that you weren't guilty of anything, and that didn't matter. Their obsession wasn't justice. It was validation for their own desire to dominate, intimidate, and control. They built the hunt like a ritual, a slow, grinding machine meant to create the illusion that what they were doing had a higher purpose. They spent years assembling files, questioning people, and analyzing situations, not because they were uncovering the truth, but because each piece of information could potentially be twisted into a reason to destroy you without shame. Every time their attempts to frame you failed, they doubled down, desperate to manufacture an excuse that would quiet their own conscience. The hunt became less about investigation and more about constructing a narrative that absolved them of the moral weight of what they wanted to do. In their minds, permission was everything. They didn't care if the facts lined up. They didn't care if logic existed. What mattered was that they could point to something, anything, and say, "See, I was justified." That obsession with justification kept the campaign alive for 8 years. They weren't chasing evidence. They were chasing a way to make themselves feel right while being completely wrong. And the more time they spent, the more exposed their motives became. By the end of it, the hunt had revealed something they never intended. You didn't need to prove yourself, because the only thing they were trying to prove was their own permission to harm. You remained clean, intact, and untouchable, while their obsession stood as a monument to insecurity, moral cowardice, and the human tendency to bend truth to fit desire. They were hunting permission, and in doing so, they exposed themselves far more than they ever could have exposed you. Number 6. The length of the hunt exposed the lie at the center of it. 8 years is a long time to chase someone for something that never happened. Most people would think that taking that long meant there had to be something real, some hidden truth they were uncovering. But in reality, the exact opposite was true. The longer they spent digging, the clearer it became that the entire story was built on nothing but smoke and mirrors. Time, in this case, didn't strengthen their case. It exposed its emptiness. Every wasted year, every dead-end investigation, every fabricated lead silently screamed that the narrative they were desperate to tell had no foundation in reality. The irony is sharp. They poured energy, resources, and obsession into proving guilt, but the passage of time became the silent witness to your innocence. Each year added weight to the truth rather than the lie. Every attempt to corner you, to manipulate evidence, to pressure witnesses, only amplified the absurdity of their claim. By the 4th year, the hunt had stopped being about investigation and started being about preserving the illusion. By the 8th year, that illusion had crumbled so badly that anyone paying attention could see it for what it was, a desperate attempt to make a fiction survive. What they failed to understand is that lies need momentum, but truth only needs endurance. While they were spinning wheels, creating documents, and whispering theories, you were living your life without a shred of guilt, without a single misstep that aligned with their narrative. Time, which they thought would erode your defense, became your greatest ally. It didn't matter how many tricks, traps, or accusations they deployed. The lie at the center of it couldn't survive constant exposure. The longer they chased, the more obvious it became to everyone watching that the story was hollow, that the accusation was a performance, and that the real exposure was of the hunters, not the hunted. By the end, the 8-year campaign stood as a monument not to your wrongdoing but to their desperation. It revealed the truth that some people can chase a story for years without ever realizing they are not hunting a criminal. They are chasing their own failure, their own obsession, and the fragile facade of control they cannot maintain. Number 7. You disrupted a narrative they needed to survive. Some people build their entire world around a story they tell themselves and others, a story where they are in control, where chaos has boundaries, and where everyone has their assigned place. You weren't part of that story. You never fit into the boxes they carefully drew, and that made you dangerous, not because of anything you did, but because of what you represented. Your life, your choices, your integrity disrupted the narrative they clung to, and human beings are notoriously bad at tolerating disruption. Instead of adjusting their story to include reality, they decided to silence the disruption. they couldn't understand, so they had to destroy. 8 years of obsession isn't about diligence. It's about fear of losing the story they've depended on. By existing outside their expectations, you exposed the fragility of the framework they built around themselves. Every time you acted in a way they couldn't predict, every time you thrived in situations they thought would contain you, you reminded them that their carefully constructed narrative was nothing more than a fragile illusion. They couldn't control you, and that was intolerable. In their minds, the only way to preserve their sense of order and authority was to eliminate the anomaly. You. The irony is brutal. You didn't need to fight them or prove anything. Simply being yourself, simply refusing to conform to their assumptions, was enough to make them panic. Every file, every whispered accusation, every wasted hour was a reflection of their need to restore a narrative that reality had already shredded. You were never the problem. They were. Your disruption exposed not just their fear, but the truth that they had been living in a carefully curated fiction, and the longer the hunt lasted, the more desperate they became to force reality to bend to that fiction. By the end of it, the narrative they clung to couldn't survive the exposure you represented. They had spent nearly a decade trying to silence a reality that could not be silenced. You didn't just disrupt their story, you revealed it for what it was, fragile, dishonest, and entirely dependent on your absence. And in standing where you did, intact and unbroken, you became the measure of their failure. The living proof that truth always undermines lies eventually. Number 8. They confused your resilience with guilt. One of the cruelest distortions in human behavior is the assumption that strength must hide something. For 8 years, every time you stood firm, every time you refused to crumble under pressure, they didn't see proof of your innocence. They saw proof of your cunning. Your calmness, your endurance, your ability to carry on while they floundered, became twisted into evidence that you were hiding something. The truth, simple and unyielding, is that resilience is often mistaken for guilt by those who cannot face their own weakness. They were so desperate to find a flaw, so determined to believe in your failure, that your strength became the very proof they sought. It's a strange kind of irony. While they were busy hunting for dirt, every day you survived without giving them a crack in your armor was a mirror reflecting their insecurity. You weren't collapsing the way they expected because you had nothing to hide, because you were untainted by the lies they tried to force upon you. But that didn't make sense to them. Human logic can be perverse when fueled by obsession. The natural assumption became, if someone doesn't break, they must be hiding something. If someone doesn't confess, they must be guilty. Their obsession blinded them to reality, making your innocence feel threatening. The longer the hunt went on, the more obvious this misjudgment became. But by then, admitting it would have meant acknowledging a decade of failure, wasted time, and a complete misunderstanding of who you were. Instead, they doubled down. Each misstep reinforcing the idea that your resilience wasn't proof of integrity, but proof of deception. In the end, their misunderstanding of your strength became the most revealing part of the entire hunt. You weren't guilty. You weren't hiding. You weren't even playing a game. You were simply enduring, living, and moving forward while their obsession consumed itself. And in their twisted logic, the very thing that should have cleared your name, the fact that you stood unbroken, was misread as the final damning evidence of your supposed crime. Their failure to see your resilience for what it truly was became the clearest exposure of all. The hunters were lost, and the hunted was free. Number 9. The hunt was a performance for others, not a search for answers. From day one, the entire campaign wasn't about uncovering the truth. It was about showing the world that they were doing something. Every file, every interview, Every surveillance operation wasn't primarily aimed at finding facts. It was aimed at creating the appearance of action, the illusion of diligence, the spectacle of authority. You weren't the target of an investigation. You were the centerpiece of a show designed to reassure, impress, and manipulate everyone watching. The longer it went on, the more obvious it became that the real audience wasn't you, it was everyone else. They needed spectators to validate their obsession, to legitimize the obsession that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with control. This kind of performance is exhausting for everyone involved, especially for the one being investigated. While they were busy rehearsing accusations and lining up evidence that never existed, you were living life with the quiet knowledge that the real story wasn't hidden. It was staring them in the face. Your innocence wasn't impressive because it needed applause, it was impressive because it was real. Meanwhile, they performed in a theater of obsession, pretending competence while revealing panic, pretending evidence while fabricating fear, pretending purpose while chasing nothing. Time was their stage, and they acted as if prolonging the spectacle could turn fiction into fact. Every wasted hour, every repeated interview, every circular report served to reinforce the appearance of authority, but it also revealed the emptiness at the heart of their mission. The world they were performing for didn't need proof. They needed a story they could point to, a demonstration that someone was being held accountable, even if that someone was innocent. By the end, the performance itself became the clearest evidence of all. The truth wasn't in the files, the interviews, or the meetings. It was in the way the story collapsed under the weight of its own theater. You didn't just survive the show, you exposed it. Their obsession, their efforts, and their carefully staged actions all revealed a brutal reality. The hunt was never about you. It was about their need to appear in control while reality quietly laughed at every desperate move they made. Number 10. They needed you to fail so they wouldn't have to change. The cruelest part of the 8-year hunt wasn't that they targeted you, it was why. They needed you to stumble, to falter, to prove them right, because your success would have forced them to confront a truth they were unwilling to face, that their own lives, their own choices, and their own systems were broken. People rarely go after others simply to punish them. They go after others to preserve their own illusions. If you had failed, they could continue as if nothing needed fixing. If you had broken, they could go back to their routines, their assumptions, and their pride, untouched by the reality that they had been wrong from the start. Every accusation, every attempt to corner you, every effort to manufacture evidence was less about finding fault and more about controlling the narrative. They couldn't stand the thought of someone thriving while their world remained stagnant. Your resilience, your integrity, your very existence threatened to expose their inertia. It's easier to hunt a person than to examine a life. It's simpler to project blame than to accept responsibility. They weren't seeking justice. They were seeking comfort, and comfort came only if you failed. The obsession is subtle, but corrosive. Each failed attempt to trap you became an uncomfortable reflection of their own inadequacies. But admitting that truth meant change, and change requires courage, honesty, and humility, 3 things they lacked. By keeping the hunt alive, they created an illusion of control, convincing themselves that the problem wasn't their systems, their decisions, or their failures. It was you. By surviving, by refusing to provide the failure they desperately needed, you forced reality into the room. You exposed the hollow motives behind years of obsession. Their entire campaign wasn't about evidence or truth. It was about avoiding the mirror. They needed you to falter to preserve their comfort, but you didn't. You endured, you thrived, and in doing so, you revealed a fundamental truth about human behavior. The longer someone obsesses over destroying you, the more you realize they were running from themselves all along. Number 11. You outlasted the lie, and that terrified them. There's a unique kind of fear that sets in when someone refuses to bend under pressure, when someone refuses to crumble under the weight of accusation, and when someone refuses to disappear into the narrative others are desperate to write. For 8 years, they chased you with the hope that time would eventually break you, that exhaustion would crack your resolve, or that the endless stress of being hunted would force you into a mistake. They didn't understand one basic truth. Lies can only survive if the person they target falters. Your endurance became the most dangerous thing in the room, because it made their entire obsession meaningless. Each failed attempt, each dead-end investigation, each fabricated accusation only chipped away at their confidence. Every time you held steady, they were reminded that their story was hollow. It doesn't matter how elaborate their surveillance, how meticulously they planned their accusations, or how convincingly they whispered to the world. Truth doesn't have to prove itself. It only has to endure. And you did. Every day that passed without a flaw or misstep on your part was another day the lie exposed itself as the desperate fantasy of people who couldn't control reality. They were terrified not because you were guilty, but because you weren't. Their power depended on the illusion that you were guilty, that you had done something wrong, and that their years of obsession were justified. Your unwavering presence, your continued life, your refusal to provide even a shred of evidence to support their narrative turned every effort into a mirror reflecting their own obsession, insecurity, and irrationality. By simply outlasting the lie, you became the silent judge of their entire campaign. Every desperate attempt to catch you in wrongdoing became a testament to their failure. Every rumor and file became proof of their obsession rather than your guilt. You didn't just survive the hunt, you exposed it. You showed that lies are fragile, obsessions are hollow, and truth doesn't chase or scramble. It stands firm. And in standing, you terrified them more than any accusation ever could, because your endurance was the living evidence that they had been hunting nothing but air all along. Number 12. The real crime would have been admitting they were wrong. By the time the hunt stretched into its 8th year, it had long stopped being about you. Every file, every accusation, every whispered conversation wasn't a pursuit of truth. It was a desperate performance to avoid facing one simple fact: they were wrong. Admitting that truth would have been more devastating to them than any mistake you could have made, because it would have meant confronting years of obsession, wasted energy, and the undeniable proof that they had misjudged you from the very beginning. The real crime wasn't your innocence. The real crime would have been their humility, the act of accepting that they were flawed, fallible, and blind. Human nature is stubbornly self-preserving. People would rather hunt the innocent for a decade than acknowledge their own mistakes. Every time evidence failed to align, every time a lead turned cold, every time the truth refused to bend, they doubled down. Not because logic demanded it, but because ego demanded it. Admitting error would have torn apart the narrative that justified their obsession. 8 years of targeting you was easier to rationalize than 8 years of admitting I was wrong. That simple confession threatened not only their credibility, but their identity. And that's why the hunt persisted. Every accusation, every dead-end investigation, every wasted hour was a testament to their refusal to face reality. They had invested too much, too long, and too personally to stop, because stopping would have meant acknowledging the futility of their actions. You were never the problem. Their inability to admit fault was. By surviving, by remaining untarnished, you exposed the invisible crime at the heart of the entire operation. You revealed the quiet, stubborn, ego-driven obsession that propelled them forward. while they chased you, they became prisoners of their own refusal to be honest. Their greatest fear wasn't that the world would see you as innocent, it was that the world would see them as fallible. And in the end, your integrity didn't just clear your name, it shined a light on the real wrongdoing, proving that sometimes the most dangerous acts are not the ones committed against us, but the ones people commit to avoid admitting their own mistakes. Number 13, your innocence became undeniable, which is why the story had to quietly die. After 8 years of relentless hunting, something undeniable emerged. The truth could no longer be hidden, twisted, or ignored. Your innocence wasn't a theory anymore. It was a fact that time itself had reinforced. Every failed accusation, every dead-end investigation, every desperate attempt to manufacture guilt had slowly but surely painted a picture that couldn't be argued with. What they spent nearly a decade trying to prove, that you were at fault, was undone not by confrontation, not by confession, but by the simple, unrelenting reality of your life. The longer you endured without a flaw, the more obvious it became that nothing they had done could stick. And that's when the story began to die, not with a dramatic confession or public admission, but quietly, almost shamefully. They didn't announce your innocence. They didn't apologize, explain, or confront the truth. There was no parade of vindication, because doing so would have forced them to face their own obsession, their own failure, and the absurdity of 8 years spent hunting a ghost. The narrative simply dissolved under its own weight. What was supposed to vilify you became a monument to their futility, a quiet testament to the difference between imagination and reality. Time, in this case, acted like a magnifying glass. Each passing year illuminated the hollowness of their claims. Every fabricated lead and every whisper of evidence lost its potency. Your life, lived with integrity, exposed their desperation in ways no argument or proof ever could. The more they tried to control the story, the more the truth asserted itself. By the end, the only thing left standing wasn't the accusation. It was your clarity, your innocence, your unwavering presence. They had tried to write a story in which you were guilty, but reality refused to cooperate. And so the story quietly died, leaving behind the uncomfortable truth for everyone who had been watching. The hunted had nothing to hide, and the hunters had nothing to claim. Your innocence didn't just survive 8 years of obsession. It became undeniable, unshakable, and utterly undeniable, proving that some truths cannot be buried, no matter how long people try. Number 14. They didn't find dirt on you. They uncovered their own reflection. After 8 years of obsession, endless tracking, false leads, and hollow accusations, the truth became painfully clear. They never found anything on you because there was nothing to find. No secret, no crime, no hidden flaw. All they uncovered in their relentless search for guilt was a reflection of themselves, their fear, their insecurity, their desperation. The irony is staggering. Every wasted hour, every whispered accusation, every attempt to corner you became a mirror, revealing the chaos, obsession, and moral weakness of those who claimed to be hunting for truth. The deeper they dug, the more obvious it became that the real exposure wasn't yours, it was theirs. Their obsession, framed as diligence, was actually a desperate attempt to convince themselves that they were right, that they were in control, that their world made sense. Every fabricated lead, every circumstantial theory, every misdirected suspicion was a projection of their own unresolved fears. They spent years chasing shadows, all the while seeing in you what they feared existed in themselves: courage, integrity, resilience. You were unshakable, and that terrified them, because their reflection showed what they weren't. By the time their obsession reached its peak, the hunt had long ceased to be about you at all. You didn't need to defend yourself. Your life, your calmness, and your endurance spoke louder than any argument, any file, any surveillance report. The more they tried to trap you, the more obvious their own flaws became. They weren't just chasing an innocent person. They were chasing a truth they couldn't face, that their own fear, jealousy, and desperation had driven them to absurdity. In the end, surviving 8 years of relentless pursuit didn't just prove your innocence, it illuminated theirs. The real story wasn't that they failed to catch you. The real story was that their obsession revealed them in full, raw clarity. The dirt they expected to find on you was nothing compared to the truth they uncovered about themselves. And in that revelation, you stood free, untarnished, and untouchable, while they were left staring at a reflection they could neither escape nor deny. After 8 years of relentless pursuit, false accusations, fabricated evidence, and endless obsession, one truth emerges with absolute clarity. You were never guilty, and the entire hunt was never about evidence. It was about fear, envy, desperation, and the inability of others to face their own flaws. Every attempt to corner you, every file compiled, every meeting held in secret, only revealed the cracks in their obsession, the hollowness of their assumptions, and the fragility of the narratives they desperately tried to uphold. You didn't just survive this campaign, you exposed it, outlasted it, and in doing so, became a mirror showing the hunters their own reflection, a reflection they could never fully face. Time, endurance, and integrity became your allies, quietly dismantling lies that had been spun to imprison you in a false story. Their obsession, which they thought could break you, ultimately broke itself, leaving behind nothing but evidence of their own panic, moral weakness, and inability to confront reality. You weren't the problem. You weren't hiding. You weren't faltering. Every day you lived your truth, while they clung to illusion, revealed the stark contrast between innocence and desperation, resilience and obsession, clarity and delusion. The longer they hunted, the more the truth of your life and the emptiness of their pursuit became undeniable. This is more than a story of surviving injustice. It's a testament to the power of truth, the resilience of the human spirit, and the inevitability of reality breaking through the illusions people build around themselves. Lies can travel fast, obsession can chase hard, but the truth endures. Your life, your integrity, and your calm endurance became the loudest statement possible. Innocence doesn't need defense, and the truth always finds its way. If this story resonates with you, if it hits a chord deep inside and reminds you of the strength within yourself or someone you know, don't just keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button to stay connected, like this video to show your support, comment below with your thoughts or experiences, and share it with anyone who needs to hear this truth. Standing with integrity in the face of obsession is rare, but it's a message the world deserves to see. God bless you.